Radio. Promoting dialogue.
It's midday in Dakar, 1 p.m. in Abuja. Good afternoon, and many thanks for staying tuned to West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM and worldwide on wadr.org. Welcome to Newslink. Here are the top stories. The Malian Supreme Court reviews embezzlement of 80 billion CFA francs in the last 3 years.
In terms of the number of people charged, at least 40 have been indicted, including 11 former ministers and their 29 accomplices. There are no longer any untouchables in Mali.
Victims and rights defenders in the Gambia welcome ECOWAS's approval for a hybrid court to prosecute atrocities during Jammeh's regime. CSO in Liberia criticizes the police over the use of force on protesters, demanding an end to the parliamentary leadership dispute. And Nigeria generates over $1 billion in 2024 from exports within the ECOWAS sub-region.
I know for a fact that Nigeria Promotion Council came up with what they call the zero oil plan. Just the way government is directly driving agri. We need to do the same for non-oil.
Stay with us for details of these stories and more.
Here is Abdullahi Hassan with Newslink.
Many thanks for joining our broadcast, and a welcome to our listeners in the Gambia, Ghana, Liberia, and Sierra Leone. Newslink begins in Mali, when estimated 80 billion CFA francs has been embezzled between 2021 and 2024. The prosecutor of the Supreme Court made this revelation. The embezzlement involves a dozen or so cases of economic and financial crimes, including forgery. As Christopher Ticho reports, at least 40 people are implicated, including former ministers and their accomplices.
The public prosecutor of the Malian Supreme Court, in an interview on national television, disclosed that the state has lost at least 80 billion CFA francs from 2021 to date. According to Mamadou Timbo, the losses are related to high-profile economic and financial crime offenses. Timbo said more information will be made public at the end of the ongoing trial to determine charges, including damage to public property, corruption and money laundering.
The damage suffered by the state is at least 80 billion CFA francs, and it's at the end of the trial that will arrive at some certainties. In terms of the number of people charged, at least 40 have been indicted, including 11 former ministers and their 29 accomplices. At one point, history stuttered in Mali. We were in a state of inertia and hesitation. Today, that's no longer the case. There are no longer any untouchables in Mali.
Reacting to the prosecutor's revelation, a civil society organization known as the Youth Association for Active Citizenship and Democracy, AJCAD, recommends other preventive approaches in the fight against corruption. Fuseni Diop is in charge of AJCAD's governance and civic engagement program.
All of this raises questions because the period mentioned, 2021 to 2024, is also a period where the transition has also taken place. I think that beyond all, we must ask real questions concerning the mechanisms put in place to reduce risks. For example, the digitization of the administration can be a solution to drastically reduce corruption. It is also the transparency and reliability of the people who govern us. The assets of certain people, especially those at the top of the state who occupy key positions, must be known to all. They can publicly declare their assets when they take office and also at the end of their tenure. This means that they are responsible for the good of the people.
Prosecutor Timbo mentions that at least 40 people have been charged, including 11 former ministers and their accomplices. Criminal proceedings are
A report filed in by WAD's Ali Jam in Bamako and voiced by Christopher Aticho. In the Gambia, victims of human rights abuses and activists have welcomed the Economic Community of West African State ECOWAS approval to establish a tribunal aimed at prosecuting crimes committed during the 22-year rule of former President Jammeh. The landmark decision was announced at the summit of regional heads of state held in Nigeria's capital, Abuja. From Banjul, WADR Sankule Janko tells us more.
The tribunal expected to investigate atrocities that took place between July 1994 and January 2017 marks a significant milestone in the country's efforts to seek justice for the countless individuals who suffered under the Yahya Jammeh regime. After years of struggle for justice, victims of Jammeh's era are hopeful that this legal process will bring closure and ensure that the perpetrators of rights abuses are held accountable. Serif Kijera is the former chairman of the Victims Center of the Gambia.
This is a good news. It's a great news. It is a giant leap towards justice and accountability. It is well received by the victims community. It is commendable. It is a great achievement for the Ministry of Justice and the government of the Gambia in particular.
Baba Haidara, whose father was killed by former President Yahya Jammeh's Black Ops, notoriously known as the Junglers, salutes the parties for the landmark decision.
To make it even better, it coincided with the anniversary of the death of my dad. So it was really something important for not only my family, but for all the other families that lost their loved ones.
Human rights defenders such as Famara Johnny, who have long advocated for accountability, have welcomed this decision as a long-awaited victory. Johnny says the creation of the hybrid court by ECOWAS sends a signal that victims will get the justice they deserve.
This is indeed a major development, a welcome development for that matter, for the Gambia and the sub-region as a whole, but most importantly for the victims of the past regime. It also signals that victims will have justice and then impunity will end in this country. It's just a matter of time. But all those who were adversely mentioned during the TRRC proceedings, including Jammeh himself, will soon face justice.
The tribunal, which is the first of its kind in the sub-region, will focus on issues such as unlawful killings, torture, forced disappearances, and other serious violations. The timeline for its establishment is, however, unknown. For News Link on West Africa Democracy Radio, I am Sankule Janko reporting from Banjul.
More from the ECOWAS 66th Summit, a regional force known as Standby Force will potentially be activated by 2025. This decision is part of the 2020 to 2024 action plan for the eradication of terrorism that also responds to the growing number of terrorist attacks in the region. The mission will comprise 5,000 personnel, including 1,600 for the counter-terrorism unit. The guidelines of the force will be defined at a meeting of finance and defense ministers when a financing module for the $2.4 billion annual budget will be agreed. In the meantime, security specialist Abraham Posthumous is urging West African leaders to resolve the issues that have delayed the effectiveness of the force plan to tackle terrorism in the sub-region.
Probably the most important one is the issue of money. It needs to be financed, and it is not entirely clear whether ECOWAS itself, in and of itself, is able to do this. The standby force must be financed from a variety of means, and whether there are both national, regional, and international sources prepared to finance this standby force remains to be seen. And, the magic word that's always used when it comes to armies, inoperability, which means can armies with their own structures, their own command and control structures, their own military cultures and the rest of it, and their own hierarchies, can they actually work together on these issues? And that is something that needs to be sorted out. We have seen how complicated this is with, for instance, the G5 Force Sahel.
Bram Posthumous is a security analyst in the Sahel.
More stories coming up on West Africa Democracy Radio. Newslink continues.
Remember, we're live on WADR.org and on Facebook, WADR English Service. Diplomatic friction has ensued between Guinea and Sierra Leone due to the deportation of dozens Sierra Leoneans living in areas deemed illegal by the Guinean authorities. The Sierra Leonean diplomatic representative in Conakry protested against the measure, and the Guinean ambassador to Freetown tempered the situation, reassuring them that everything will be done to quickly resolve the diplomatic crisis. Over the past few days, the Public Prosecutor's Office of the Conakry Court of Appeal and the City Governor's Office, supported by the Defense and Security Forces, have launched eviction operations in areas deemed Criminogenic citizens claiming to be Sierra Leoneans were arrested at several of the city's landing stages and repatriated to Pemelamp, the border post between Guinea and Sierra Leone. Sierra Leone's diplomatic representation in Conakry expressed disagreement with the mass repatriations. According to the public prosecutor, the current operation is aimed not only at Sierra Leoneans, but all those living in the area. Liberia once again experienced another incident of public concern when thousands of protesters under the banner of Concerned Citizens for the Protection of Our Constitution, Democracy and the Rule of Law converged on Capitol building on Tuesday. Their demand, among others, is an end to the political crisis at the House of Representatives amid an attempt to remove embattled Speaker Fonati Kofa. The protest turned violent when officers of the Liberia National Police deployed to the area fired tear gas at the crowd. Several protesters reportedly sustained serious injuries and a few others arrested, including Sekou Kalasco Demaro, former presidential aide to George Weah. WADR's Grace Joshua in Monrovia has the rest of the details.
Barely 1 year in office, Joseph Boakai administration is coming under increasing pressure following widespread public criticism over the state of governance in the country. Citizens and civil servants elect have expressed frustration with the leadership crisis in the House of Representatives that has paralyzed legislative activities, forcing hundreds of people to the street of Monrovia on Tuesday to demand an end to the power tussle. As the protesters assembled in front of the National Assembly, violence erupted between them and officers of the Liberia National Police deployed to disperse the crowd. While no one was reported dead, 4 people were injured and 11 others were arrested, including a former presidential aide. Menipaka Demore, convener of the Concerned Citizen for the Protection of the Constitution, Democracy and the Rule of Law protest, has criticized the police for the use of force.
At the Capitol building, we saw police brutality unleashed, and we are totally disturbed by the heavy-handed state intervention, which seems to ignore the constitutional rights of Liberians.
The Inspector General of the Liberia National Police, Gregory Coleman, at a news conference Tuesday evening termed the allegations against his officer attacking protesters false and misleading.
The police guided them, protected their rights. When the barricade was broken and all verbal command failed, that was when there was an escalation, and that escalation was only with the use of a non-lethal approach.
Critics are currently calling for release of some citizens who were arrested during the protest by hundreds of demonstrators on Tuesday morning. They are demanding the immediate restoration of constitutional order, including resolving the legislative impasses and ceasing political interferences in the House of Representatives.
WADR's Grace Joshua in Monrovia filed that report. Let's take you now to Ghana for a breaking story. The Supreme Court today, Wednesday, rejected 2 appeals opposing a repressive anti-LGBTQ+ law passed by members of Parliament at the end of February. A 7-member panel of the Supreme Court, led by Justice Lovelace Everett Johnson, unanimously dismissed a petition filed by broadcast journalist and lawyer Richard Delascar challenging the constitutionality of the Human Sexual Rights and Family Values Bill. Sky had sought a declaration that the bill, which has ignited intense national debate, was null and void. However, the court rejected his petition, affirming the constitutionality of the legislative process for the proposed anti-LGBTQI legislation. The controversial bill aims to criminalize activities associated with lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and intersex advocacy. If passed into law, it would impose penalties on individuals promoting or funding LGBTQI-related activities, as well as those providing indirect support. Proponents argue the bill is necessary to protect Ghanaian cultural and family values, which they claim are being undermined by foreign ideologies. And just before the break, we remain in Ghana still, where the minority in Parliament has called on the government to provide answers regarding the deaths that occurred during the recently concluded election. At least 3 persons died during the 2024 election and its aftermath, while at least 8 died in 2020. But the Ministry of Defense says the government had no role in election security, directing the minority to the head of the Election Security Task Force the Inspector General of Police, George Akufo-Dampare. WADR's Nadiri Tete reports.
Addressing Parliament, Tamale North MP Alassane Suhuyini emphasized that election-related deaths must not be normalized. Mr. Suhuyini pointed out that at least 3 people lost their lives during the 2024 election in its aftermath, compared to 8 fatalities recorded in 2020. The Tamale North MP urged the Defense and Interior Ministers to appear before the House to provide explanations.
Loss of lives during elections should not become a norm. I will plead that the Business Committee considers a briefing to this House by either the Defense Minister or the Interior Minister or whoever was responsible for the provision of security in the just ended election.
In response to the minority's demand, Defense Minister Dominic Nitiwo firmly rejected claims that the government should bear responsibility for any security lapses during the 2024 general election. He clarified that the National Election Security Task Force, led by the Inspector General of Police, Dr. George Akufo-Dampare, was solely responsible for overseeing security arrangements during the election period.
If you call any other person, whether it's defense or interior or any of the ministers, they will just be there. They will have no answers because before elections, the election and after election, is the security people who are in charge, led by the Inspector General of Police. If you are calling somebody, it can only be the IGP and his team.
The recurring loss of lives during Ghana's last 2 elections is a growing concern for many stakeholders, with heightening calls on the relevant authorities to ensure the perpetrators are brought to book. For WADR, Nadiri Tete, Accra.
You are listening to Newslink here on West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM and worldwide on WADR.org. Here's a reminder of our top stories. The Mali Supreme Court reveals embezzlement of 80 billion CFA francs in the last 3 years. Victims and rights defenders in the Gambia welcome ECOWAS's approval for a hybrid court to prosecute atrocities during Jammeh's regime. A CSO in Liberia criticizes the police over the use of force on protesters, demanding an end to the parliamentary leadership dispute. Still ahead in the news, Nigeria generates over $1 billion in 2024 from exports within the ECOWAS sub-region. We also have the press review, guest interview, and sports news. Please stay with us.
You are listening to West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting from Dakar, Senegal.
Many thanks for staying with us. Nigeria's exports to countries within the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, reached 1.54 trillion naira, or $1.96 billion in the third quarter of 2024. According to the National Bureau of Statistics, NBS, Cote d'Ivoire, Togo, and Ghana are some of the highest importers from Nigeria. From Abuja, Usman Umar reports.
According to the NBS, Cote d'Ivoire and Togo were Nigeria's top trading partners within ECOWAS in the third quarter of 2024, accounting for 97.6% of total exports, valued at $844.65 million and $732.35 million US respectively. Petroleum oils dominated Nigeria's exports, making up 83.45% of the $1.96 billion US total, followed by electric power, liquefied petroleum gases, and cocoa beans. Economic analyst Bamidele Ayumbo suggested Nigeria could boost its export earnings by diversifying its product base.
We need deliberate export policy. I know for a fact that Nigeria Promotion Council came up with what they call the Zero Oil Plan, and that has been on the table in the presidency from what I heard for some time now. We're expecting to be launched by the president. Just the way government is directly driving agri. We need to do the same for non-oil.
For his part, Collins Nweke, a global affairs expert, warns that the potential exit of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger from ECOWAS in 2025 could destabilize the bloc and harm the economies of member countries.
Nobody is served good by this, intended exit. Not for the 3 countries, because they complained that ECOWAS has not lived up to expectation in terms of security, bettering the lot of the people, and so on and so forth. Now, the 3 countries that constitute the alliance of Sahel states that are now leaving, they're not going to be safer by leaving.
On imports, Nigeria's purchases from ECOWAS amounted to $104.59 million US, with petroleum bitumen, aviation gasoline, and cocoa powder as the major items. Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, and Togo were the leading import sources. For Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, Usman Umar reporting from Abuja.
Well, more on trade. The third edition of the Japan-Africa Public-Private Economic Forum, which ended yesterday in Abidjan, was marked by the signing of 40 memorandums of understanding between Tokyo and players in the African public-private sector. The signing ceremony was presided over by the Ivorian Minister of Trade and Industry and his Japanese counterpart. Among the countries benefiting from the agreement are Kenya, Cote d'Ivoire, South Africa, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Malawi, Nigeria, and Ghana.
This is the newspaper review. Stay abreast and find out what the top stories are in your country.
This is the newspaper review.
The newspaper review.
Let's join WADR's Sankule Janko Banjul. He's standing by for today's press review.
Hello there and welcome to this edition of the press review coming to you from Banjul, the Gambia. Let's begin with the Standard newspaper. And the Standard newspaper's lead story says activists says Senegal ideal place to try Jammeh crimes. That's according to one activist. Fonyi Nam asked government to focus on resurrecting dead economy than prosecute Jammeh. That is another story on the Standard newspaper. APRC Kimping tells Barrow to give deaf ear to special tribunal. Meanwhile, U.S. hails ECOWAS for decision to establish special tribunal. Let's move on to the Fourier newspaper for today. And the lead story on the Fourier newspaper reads, no cash at Secos to commence groundnut trade season in the Gambia. Secos are where government usually buy groundnut from farmers across the country. MRCG staff union call of strike resume work today. Senator Martin says KMC inflated Mbalit truck price. This other one reads, Parliament to engage Environment Minister on investigation into Kiang Kayav Mahoney incident. Victims Center welcomes ECOWAS approval for a special tribunal. Let's take a look at the final newspaper for today, and that's the Point newspaper. And the lead story on the Point newspaper reads, Ferry Services, GM, unveils 2025 blueprint ahead of new ferry. 11 communities in CRR announced defection to UDP. This other one reads, government launches employment forum to create 150,000 jobs. Gambia-Senegal Economic Forum to cement friendly environment. And the Gambia Press Union President-elect outlines vision for better media. I'm afraid these are the major stories making headlines on Gambian dailies. And it's back to you in the studio.
So Uncle Janko there with the press review.
Politics, analysis on major news, social matters, and all. This is a guest.
Our guest is a budget and financial expert, Elhaj Sam, who joins us with his reaction and analysis for the recently signed MOUs between Tokyo and Africa. In his view, Africa is opening up to a more competitive international business arena, but should be cautious in negotiations to avoid any catastrophic loss.
The first reaction is that Africa is more and more going out and trying to remove themselves from their former colonies, because historically what we see is that we have close relation between us and our former colonies. For example, in Senegal, we can take the example of France. And now we see that the African countries are going more to the countries of the Gulf, to the countries of Asia's continent. And I think that this is something that bring many questions in our minds. First of all, is that there are a lot of decrease in terms of perception of funding opportunities, and I think that they are trying to move away from their former colonies, because in terms of economy, I think you don't have those relations of former colonies. And then also the second view, I see that the kind of MOUs are different between the countries. And I think that it is due to the fact that every country has its own specificities. Senegal has signed an MOU in terms of agriculture and fisheries. And I see that when you go to Rwanda, for example, they are more focused on mobility, Cote d'Ivoire on mobility, and Kenya on oil. And I think that this is something very important. But only my own view is that I'm very hopeful that these MOU will be win-win partnership.
Now, talk about win-win partnership between the parties involved in this agreement. Which among them, these agreements eventually will impact the African economy the most?
I think that those agreements relating to sustainable development, agriculture, fishery will be more useful for us. And also, I will add something, because these are companies. And when we talk about win-win partnership, you see, for example, we have the Toyota Shoe Group, which is a Toyota group, and they don't sign memorandum only because of our nice ISIS. No, this is a memorandum that they would like to benefit. And I think this will be a good entry of Asia to Africa. And I think France and the other countries, our historical partners, will need to put place for this new partnership.
Tell us, how should African governments and leaders negotiate going forward during any of these summits and agreements to come? I mean, soon we are going to be in 2025, and more of these agreements will actually come up between Africa and other development partners or countries. What should be the considerations as they enter negotiations?
I think that the negotiation will be simple in the sense that we have our work plan. So everything that we do in terms of partnership should be included in our work plan. Senegal has its work plan, Ivory Coast has his, as well as Nigeria. And secondly, knowing that Africa is a continent of opportunity, so we should be the first one to benefit from this, because we are poor countries negotiating with rich countries. And sustainable development also should be taken into account, because we should not sign MOU or contract that will have negative impact on our future generation.
Elhaj Sam is a budget and financial expert. In the world of sports, Super League promoters on Tuesday revealed they have asked FIFA and UEFA for official recognition of their proposed competition renamed the Unity League, leaning on ruling from Europa's top court. A22 Sport Management said it sent the proposal after discussions with various leagues, clubs and other stakeholders, revising its qualification system to base participation on annual domestic performances. It has submitted plans for competitions featuring 96 teams divided into 4 leagues running from September to April, followed by a knockout phase starting with the quarterfinals. In a statement, A22 argued last year's European Court of Justice (ECJ) ruling meant that any competition where qualification is inclusive and meritocratic and which complies with the overall match calendar can be officially established. Promoters also said matches will be shown live for free via streaming platform. And with that, we've come to the end of this edition of Newslink here on West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM, Dakar, Senegal. Thank you for listening, and many thanks to Christian Mukidi and Maojo Juf for the technical support. Do interact with us via social media platforms, X, formerly Twitter, Instagram at WADR News, and on Facebook, WADR English Service. Coming up at the bottom of the hour is our flagship gender program, 50/50. I'm Abdullah Hassan. Good afternoon.
And many thanks to you for listening to Newslink via Hot 104.3 FM, Newmi FM 94.0,
Hilltop Radio 104.7 FM,
and Veritas Radio 102.9 in Banjul, the Gambia. We also appreciate our listeners in Liberia via Alternative Youth Radio 98.9 FM, Lofa County,
Radio Kagama 94.5 FM, Niba County, DCN Radio 91.3 FM, Riverside County, Wakat FM Radio, Banga, Liberia, Radio Baf FM 91.3 Sierra Leone.
For you listening via Radio Pad 95.1 Damango, Savannah region, and on Royals FM 104.7 Wenchi, Ghana, we say a big thank you. Remember, West Africa Democracy Radio is